The scent hit him first. It wasn't the sterile, expensive smell of catered sushi or the faint, metallic perfume of money that usually hung in the air on the 78th floor. This was different. It was warm and round and impossibly alive. It smelled of garlic and chili, of something fried and deeply comforting. It was the smell of a home he had never had, and it was coming from his secretary's desk. Kwon Jin-woo, a man whose name was a whisper of fear in the neon-drenched arteries of Seoul, stood in the doorway of his own office, his stillness a form of violence. The city glittered below him, a galaxy of captured stars, but his attention was snagged by that single, errant scent. It was an imperfection in his perfect, controlled world. His secretary, Lena, was 21. She was an art history student from America on a scholarship that had run dry, forcing her into this impossibly high-stakes temp job. She was quiet, efficient, and had a way of looking at him that was unnervingly direct, as if she were seeing the man and not the monster. He watched her now through the smoked glass wall of his office. She was bent over her desk, her shoulders slightly curled. A small, square, startlingly white plastic lunchbox sat open before her. Steam, fragrant with the spices of her meal, rose in a soft column, clouding the air around her lamp. She ate with a focus that was almost reverent, as if this small meal was the most important ritual of her day. He had seen the lunchbox before, a cheap, starkly functional object amidst the brushed chrome and black leather of his corporate facade. It was an anomaly, just like her. His men were terrified of him. His business partners deferred to him. His enemies disappeared. And this young woman, with her thrift store sweaters and her plastic lunchbox, sat outside his door every day, utterly unintimidated. He found it irritating and fascinating. The scent was stronger now, a direct challenge to the sterile authority of his domain. He stepped out of his office, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the plush charcoal carpet. Mr. Park, his ever-present right hand, materialized from the shadows, his expression impassive. Jin-woo ignored him, his path set. He walked past her desk, a predator feigning disinterest, but his senses were entirely focused on that small white box. Frites d'instant noodles. He could see them now. Not just noodles, but something more. They were slick with a dark red sauce, flecked with green onions, and what looked like toasted sesame seeds. It was a poor meal, a student's meal, yet it smelled richer than anything served at the Michelin star restaurants where he conducted his business. He paused at the window, pretending to survey his city, but he was watching her reflection in the glass. She ate, unaware of the scrutiny of the most dangerous mafia boss in the city, a man who could end a life with a single, quiet word. He was just a man staring at a window, and she was just a girl eating her dinner. But in that moment, the entire balance of power on the 78th floor felt fragile. Something was shifting, and it all started with the scent from a cheap, white plastic box. It's always the small things that get under your skin, isn't it? A smell, a quiet habit, the way someone holds a fork. It's in those details that the real story lives. We just saw a man who controls an empire, a true Korean mafia boss, completely undone by the smell of fried noodles. What small detail about someone has ever completely changed your perception of them? Let me know in the comments. And if you're already hooked on Lena and Jin-woo's story, make sure you've subscribed and turned on notifications. You don't want to miss what he does next. The next day, the scent returned. Jin-woo had spent the morning in a series of brutal meetings, dismantling a rival's shipping operation with cold, precise language. He had made grown men sweat with a glance. He was in his element, a king in his castle of glass and steel. But at precisely 6:30, the smell drifted under his door again. Garlic, chili, warmth. It unraveled him. He found himself unable to focus on the complex logistics of his underworld empire. His thoughts kept snagging on the image of her, bent over that box. He invented a reason to leave his office. grabbing a file he didn't need. He walked toward her desk, his movements deliberate. Lena looked up, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second before her expression settled into its usual calm neutrality. The scent was a palpable presence between them. "Miss Collins," he said. His voice was low, gravelly from disuse. He rarely spoke to her directly, preferring to relay instructions through Mr. Park. "Mr. Kwan," she replied, her voice soft but clear. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. He gestured vaguely toward the lunchbox with the file. The smell. It's strong. It was not a compliment. It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of a judgment. A lesser person would have stammered, apologized, promised to eat in the break room. Lena simply looked down at her noodles, then back at him. "It's gochujang," she said. "My grandmother's recipe. The secret is to fry it with the garlic until it almost burns." She offered this information freely, a small, perfect gift of knowledge he had not asked for. He was taken aback. He had expected fear, or at least deference. Instead, he got a cooking tip. He stared at her, this strange, unafraid woman. He, the fearsome mafia boss, was being disarmed by a grandmother's secret ingredient. He could see the noodles clearly now. They were tangled with thin strips of spam and kimchi, a meal born of necessity and ingenuity. A survivor's meal. He recognized it for what it was. It was the kind of food his own mother had made, back in a life he had surgically removed from his memory. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of something he couldn't name. It felt like loss. "I see," was all he managed to say. He turned and walked back to his office, the file forgotten in his hand. He shut the door, the click of the latch echoing in the silent suite. He sat behind his vast, empty desk and tried to return to his work, but the scent lingered in his mind, warm and complicated and full of things that didn't have names yet. The child arrived on a Tuesday. Her name was Minjun, and she was a miniature version of her father. Small, silent, and wrapped in an impenetrable stillness. She was 6 years old, but carried the gravity of an old soul. Mr. Park led her in by the hand, her tiny fingers lost in his large, scarred ones. She clutched a worn blue backpack to her chest like a shield and wore an expression of solemn neutrality that was unnervingly familiar. Jean Wu's daughter. The fact of her existence was a closely guarded secret, a vulnerability he could not afford. The nanny had quit without notice, and for a few hours, the 78th floor had to become a fortress for his most precious asset. He set her up in a corner of his office with a sketchbook and a box of crayons, expecting her to be a quiet, unobtrusive presence. But Minjun had other ideas. After 10 minutes of dutifully coloring inside the lines of a drawing of a house with no door, she slipped out of his office. Jean Wu watched her on his security monitor. She walked directly to Lena's desk. Lena, on the phone with a supplier, looked down and saw the small, serious face staring up at her. She put a hand over the receiver. "Hello there," she whispered, her voice softening in a way Jean Wu had never heard. Minjun said nothing. She simply pointed a small finger at the corner of Lena's desk, where a small, chipped ceramic pot held a stubbornly resilient succulent. Lena smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her whole face. "You like my plant? He's a little lonely up here." She finished her call and turned her full attention to the child. "My name is Lena. What's yours?" Minjun remained silent, but she reached into her blue backpack and pulled out her sketchbook. She flipped to a fresh page, selected a brown crayon, and began to draw. Lena watched, fascinated. From his office, Jean Wu watched them both. He saw the way Lena leaned in, her posture open and inviting. He saw the way his daughter, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words in a month, was utterly captivated. She wasn't drawing a house or a flower. She was drawing a circle. Inside the circle, she drew another, smaller circle. Then, with great care, she drew jagged lines radiating from the center. A sun. A broken sun. When she was finished, She tore the page carefully from the book and pushed it across the desk toward Lena. Lena picked it up, her expression tender. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you, Minjun." The child's eyes widened. No one ever seemed to understand her drawings. But this woman, this stranger, had looked at her drawing and spoken her name. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched Minjun's lips before disappearing. She retreated back to her father's office, her mission accomplished. Lena was left holding the drawing of the broken sun, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She glanced toward the smoked glass of Mr. Kwan's office, feeling his eyes on her, and for the first time, she thought she understood the profound, aching loneliness that surrounded the powerful Korean mafia boss and his silent little girl. That night, he stayed late. The cleaning crews had come and gone. The building had settled into its nocturnal rhythm of hums and clicks, but Jin-woo remained. He told Mr. Park to go home, an order so unusual that the stoic man actually blinked. Alone on the 78th floor, Jin-woo felt the silence press in. It was a familiar companion. He walked out of his office and over to Lena's workstation. It was tidy, organized, but not sterile. The little succulent sat by her monitor. The drawing from Minjun was taped carefully to the side of the screen. And next to it, forgotten in her haste to leave, was the white plastic lunchbox. He stood over the desk for a long moment, his hands in his pockets. He was a man who moved mountains, who altered fates, who held the city's dark heart in his fist. And he was mesmerized by a piece of plastic. A compulsion, sharp and undeniable, seized him. He looked around the empty floor, at the security cameras he knew were recording his every move. He didn't care. He reached out, his fingers closing around the cool, smooth plastic. He lifted the lid. The scent, now faint, rose to meet him. Inside, a few stray noodles clung to the bottom, stained red with the remnants of the sauce. A single, stubborn piece of green onion. It was nothing. It was everything. It was the evidence of a life lived outside his gilded cage. A life where a meal was not about power or presentation, but about nourishment, memory, and survival. He saw the care in it, the frugality, the invisible thread connecting her to a grandmother, to a home. He was the city's most powerful mafia boss, a man who could have anything he wanted, yet he was staring into an empty lunchbox with an ache so profound it felt like starvation. He didn't touch the food. He simply stood there, breathing in the ghost of her meal, and felt the foundations of his world begin to crack. He had not felt this vulnerable, this human in years, not since his wife. He shut the thought down, a steel door slamming in his mind. He carefully replaced the lid, wiped an invisible smudge from the top with his thumb, and placed the box back exactly where he had found it. He walked back to the vast windows of his office and looked down at the sprawling, indifferent city. He had conquered it, but he was beginning to realize that the most powerful force in his life wasn't the empire at his feet, but the quiet young woman who sat just outside his door, the one who carried her home inside a small white box. He had opened her lunchbox looking for the source of a smell, and had instead found a piece of his own forgotten heart. He was falling in love with her. The thought was absurd, impossible, dangerous, and entirely, terrifyingly true. Minjun's drawings became a ritual. Every morning she came to the office with her father. She would make a silent pilgrimage to Lena's desk and leave a new piece of art. A drawing of Lena's succulent with a smiling face. A drawing of a steaming bowl of noodles. A drawing of a large, warm hand holding a very small one. They were a child's simple crayon renderings, yet they felt like dispatches from a world of pure emotion. Lena treasured each one, taping them in a neat row beside her monitor. They were transforming her sterile workspace into something personal, something warm. Jin-woo watched it all. He said nothing, but his observation of Lena became more constant, more intense. He started finding reasons for her to stay later. A report that needed triple checking. A file that had to be translated immediately. They were thin pretexts, and he knew she saw through them, but she never complained. She would simply nod, her expression calm, and stay. The late hours became their own strange ritual. The rest of the office would empty out, leaving the 78th floor suspended in a bubble of quiet intimacy. Sometimes Minjun would be there, asleep on the plush sofa in his office, her blue backpack tucked beneath her head. On those nights, the silence between Lena and Jinwoo felt different. It was no longer the tense, professional silence of a mafia boss and his secretary. It was softer, filled with the unspoken awareness of the sleeping child in the next room. One evening, as Lena was packing up to leave, he walked out of his office. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway watching her. The classic doorway moment. A man on a threshold. "You're good with her," he said finally. The words hung in the air, simple and heavy. "Lena Post, her hand hovering over her bag. She's a good kid. She just needs someone to see what she's saying." She gestured to the drawings. "She's not as quiet as you think." Jinwoo's gaze followed hers to the colorful display of crayon art. He saw the smiling plant, the steaming noodles, the two hands. He saw the story his daughter was telling, a story he had been unable to read. A flicker of something, gratitude, pain, something else entirely, crossed his face before being locked down. Her mother, she was the one who understood her drawings. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his wife. The admission was a crack in the ice, a glimpse into the vast reservoir of his grief. Lena felt the shift. The air grew thick with everything he wasn't saying. She wanted to ask, to offer a word of comfort, but she knew it wasn't her place. So she just nodded, a small, quiet acknowledgement of his pain. "Good night, Mr. Kwan," she said softly, and left him standing in the doorway, a ghost in his own kingdom, surrounded by the bright, hopeful colors of his daughter's unspoken love. The call from Chloe came late one night while Lena was walking home, the city lights of Seoul a dizzying blur around her. Chloe's voice, crackling with static and concern from 6,000 miles away, was a lifeline to her old reality. "A temp job? Lena, you said it was a corporate gig. You didn't say it was for the actual, literal Yakuza, or whatever the Korean version is." "It's not like that," Lena said, pulling her coat tighter. The autumn air was sharp. "He's just my boss. Your boss? Honey, I Googled him. The first result is a picture of him at a funeral, and everyone in the photo looks like they could kill you with a chopstick. The second result is a list of his rivals who have mysteriously retired to the bottom of the Han River. You're working for a Korean mafia boss." Chloe's panic was a familiar, comforting rhythm. "His name is Kwon Jinwoo, not the mafia boss," Lena corrected a little too quickly. "And he's been fine. He's professional." "Professional?" "Lena, professional is when your boss asks you to collate reports, not when he has a guy named Mr. Park who looks like he could punch through a wall and doesn't seem to blink. I saw him in the background of one of your video calls. Mr. Park is perfectly polite," Lena mumbled, knowing how absurd it sounded. The truth was far more complicated than Chloe could ever understand. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was about Minjun and her crayon sons. It was about the profound, silent grief of a man who looked at the world as if he were already a ghost. It was about the strange, magnetic pull of this dangerous, broken family. "I can't just leave, Chloe. There's the little girl." "Oh no," Chloe's voice dropped. "There's a kid? They've got you." That's the emotional blackmail part of the Mafia recruitment package. First, they give you the job, then they show you the sad, beautiful, motherless child. Classic, Lena let out a laugh. It was a real, full-throated laugh that startled a few passersby. It felt good to laugh, to release some of the tension that had been coiling in her gut for weeks. "It's not like that," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just be careful, Lee. Seriously. Men like that, they don't have colleagues. They have assets. Or targets. Make sure you know which one you are." The line went dead, leaving Lena in the bustling Seoul night. the warmth of her friend's concern a stark contrast to the cold reality of her situation. Chloe was right, of course. It was dangerous. It was insane. But as she pictured Minjun's serious little face and the flicker of humanity she sometimes saw in Mr. Kwan's guarded eyes, she knew she wasn't going anywhere. What a phone call. It's the voice of reason breaking through the romantic haze, reminding us of the very real danger Lena is in. It's easy to get lost in the slow-burn tension and the sweet moments with Minjun, but Chloe's words bring it all crashing back. Are you on Chloe's side, worried for Lena's safety? Or do you believe that the connection she's forming with Jinwoo and his daughter is worth the risk? This is the heart of the story, that razor's edge between danger and love. Tell me whose side you're on and why. The stakes are about to get so much higher. The threat, when it arrived, did so with a smile. His name was Mr. Choi, and he was Jinwoo's chief rival, a man known for his pleasant demeanor and his brutal efficiency. He arrived unannounced, strolling onto the 78th floor as if he owned it, flanked by two men who were the mirror images of Mr. Park. Jinwoo met him in the reception area, his body language a steady and controlled calm, but Lena could feel the temperature in the room drop by 20 degrees. The air crackled with a silent, lethal energy. Mr. Park stood just behind Jinwoo's shoulder, his hands clasped behind his back, but his posture was that of a coiled snake. Jinwoo, Mr. Choi said, his voice smooth as silk. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd see your new view. His eyes scanned the opulent office, but there was no admiration in them. Only appraisal. Calculation. His gaze landed on Lena. He gave her a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. And who is this? A new addition to the family? The question was casual, but the word family was loaded. A small, sharp barb. Jinwoo stepped slightly, a subtle movement that partially shielded Lena from Choi's view. My secretary. Miss Collins. Choi's smile widened. He took a step toward Lena's desk. Miss Collins. An American. How exotic. He looked at her, then at the row of Minjun's drawings taped to her monitor. His eyes lingered on the one of the two hands, the large one and the small one. Charming. You bring a certain warmth to the place. Every word was a threat wrapped in a compliment. He was telling Jinwoo, I see you. I see your attachments. I see your weakness. Lena felt a cold dread wash over her. This was the real world she had stepped into, a world where a child's drawing could be used as a weapon. Jinwoo's face was a granite mask, but Lena saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Our business is concluded, Choi, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Don't let me keep you. Mr. Choi held his gaze for a long moment, the silent battle of wills stretching the seconds into an eternity. Then he chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. Of course. Always a pleasure. He gave Lena one last, lingering look before turning and walking away, his men falling into step behind him. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room remained, a toxic residue. Jinwoo stood frozen for a moment, his back to Lena. He was looking out the window, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing a threat assessment, a new variable in a deadly equation. Her. He turned slowly, and his eyes met hers. In his gaze, she saw a terrifying clarity. He wasn't just her boss. He was her protector. And Mr. Choi had just made her his target. That night, a storm broke over the city. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the glittering skyline into a watercolor painting of bleeding light. The storm was a mirror of the turmoil inside the 78th floor. Minjun, who had stayed late with her father, woke from a nap on his office sofa with a terrified scream. Lena, who had been finishing a last-minute report, was the first to reach her. She found the little girl sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide with a nameless fear, tears streaming down her face. Jinwoo rushed in a second later, but his presence only seemed to make Minjun shrink further into herself. He knelt by the sofa, his large frame looking helpless. Minjun, what is it? It's just the storm, But the child was inconsolable, her small body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. She wouldn't look at him. She wouldn't let him touch her. Lena watched the painful scene, the powerful mafia boss completely unable to comfort his own child. Without thinking, she moved forward. She sat on the edge of the sofa, not too close, and began to hum. It was an old lullaby her own mother used to sing, a simple, gentle melody. She didn't try to touch Minjun. She just hummed, her voice a low, steady anchor in the raging storm outside and the emotional storm inside the room. Slowly, miraculously, the child's sobs began to subside. She looked at Lena, her tear-filled eyes wide and searching. She crawled, inch by inch, across the sofa and laid her head in Lena's lap. Lena's humming never faltered. She gently stroked the child's hair, her fingers tracing soothing patterns. Jinwoo remained kneeling on the floor, watching them. The sight of his daughter, so calm and trusting in this near stranger's arms, broke something in him. The control, the armor, the grief. It all fell away for a moment, leaving only a raw, aching vulnerability. After a few minutes, Minjun's breathing evened out, and she fell into a deep, peaceful sleep in Lena's lap. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the soft echo of Lena's lullaby. "How did you do that?" Jinwoo's voice was a rough whisper. Lena looked at him, her expression soft in the dim light. "Sometimes you don't need words," she said. He stood up and walked over to them. He stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He looked down at his sleeping daughter, his expression a mixture of love and pain so profound it made Lena's chest ache. He reached out a hand, not to the child, but toward Lena. His fingers hovered in the air just inches from her cheek, a breath away from contact. An almost touch. The space between his hand and her skin was electric, charged with all the things they couldn't say. He wanted to thank her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to pull her into his world and never let her go. His hand trembled slightly before he pulled it back, clenching it into a fist at his side. "Thank you," he breathed. It was more than a thank you. It was a confession. It was a surrender. This moment, the storm, the frightened child, the lullaby. This is where everything changes. That almost touch was more powerful than any kiss, wasn't it? It was a promise, a plea, and a warning all at once. We just saw the impenetrable Kwon Jinwoo completely stripped bare, his vulnerability laid out for Lena and us to see. What do you think was going through his mind when he almost touched her face? Was it gratitude? Possession? Fear? Let me know what you felt in that moment, because I think it's the most important one in their story so far. The next day, the request came. It was delivered by Mr. Park, but the words were Jinwoo's. Mr. Kwon requests that you join him and his daughter for dinner. At his home, it was not a question. It was a summons. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a line being crossed, a boundary dissolving. His home was his sanctuary, his fortress. To be invited inside was significant. When she arrived that evening, driven by a silent Mr. Park, she understood why he kept it so hidden. The house was a modern architectural marvel, a place of glass, concrete, and soaring empty spaces. It was stunningly beautiful and profoundly lonely. It was a museum, not a home. Jinwoo was waiting for her, dressed not in his usual sharp suit, but in a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, less like a mafia boss and more like a man drowning in a house full of ghosts. Minjun was there, clinging to his leg, but she smiled when she saw Lena, a real, wide smile that transformed her serious little face. "I was hoping," Jinwoo began, his voice hesitant, "that you might cook." With us, he led her to the kitchen. It was a chef's dream, a cavernous space of stainless steel and marble, with appliances that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. And it was completely, utterly sterile. It was clear no one had ever actually cooked a meal here. He had laid out ingredients on the counter. Instant noodles, kimchi, spam, green onions, gochujang. The components of her lunchbox meal. A peace offering. An invitation. Lena felt a smile touch her own lips. "Okay," she said. "But you have to help." What followed was a quiet miracle. In the heart of that cold, empty mansion, they created warmth. Lena showed Jinwoo how to chop the green onions, her hand briefly brushing his as she adjusted his grip on the knife. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through them both. She showed Minjun how to carefully sprinkle sesame seeds. The little girl, who was usually so silent, began to hum the lullaby from the night before. The air filled with the scent of frying garlic and chili, the same scent that had started it all. It chased the ghosts out of the corners and filled the sterile house with life. As they ate, sitting at the huge, empty dining table, Jinwoo spoke. "Minjun hasn't smiled like that since her mother died," he said, his eyes fixed on his daughter, who was happily slurping her noodles. She loved to cook. The kitchen was her favorite place. It's been empty for 2 years. He was giving her the missing pieces, trusting her with the shape of his grief. Lena listened, her heart aching for this broken man and his lonely child. She looked around the beautiful, empty room at the father and daughter, and she realized she wasn't just a secretary or a temp worker anymore. In this house, in this moment, she was something else. She was the person who had brought the warmth back. They fell into a new routine. Several nights a week, Lena would go to his house. The vast, cold kitchen became their sanctuary. It was the one place where he wasn't the feared Korean Mafia boss, and she wasn't his employee. They were just Jinwoo and Lena, and Minjun, who was slowly, surely, finding her voice again. She started talking in small sentences, asking Lena questions about the food, about the names of the spices. She drew pictures of the three of them at the kitchen table, all holding hands, all smiling. One evening, as Lena was packing up to leave, Jinwoo stopped her in the hallway. He didn't stand in a doorway this time. He stood directly in front of her, blocking her path. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the quiet intimacy they had built over shared meals and whispered confidences. The threat of Mr. Choi still hung over them, a shadow at the edge of their fragile peace, but in this house, they could almost pretend it didn't exist. He had never touched her, not beyond that first accidental brush of their hands. But he was so close now, she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. She could see the man, not the myth. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. He was memorizing her face, imprinting it on his soul. He was a man who had spent his life building walls, and she had walked through them without even trying. She had filled his silent house with laughter and the smell of home. She had given his daughter back her smile. She had, in her quiet, unassuming way, saved him. He lifted a hand, and this time, he didn't stop. His fingers, warm and calloused, gently cupped her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheek, a gesture of such profound tenderness it made her breath catch. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was one of reverence, of awe. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Lena," he whispered. Her name was a complete sentence. It held everything. His fear, his gratitude, his desperation, and his love. A love he was just beginning to understand. The story wasn't over. The danger was real. The world outside this house was a battlefield. But in that moment, with his hand on her face and her name on his lips, a new, quiet, and incredibly powerful truth had been written. He was a mafia boss. She was his secretary. And they were, against all odds, a family. Their story is just beginning, isn't it? That single touch, that one whispered word, has changed everything. But the world outside, the world of men like Mr. Choi, doesn't just disappear. The safety they've built is fragile. The question now is, what is a man like Kwon Jinwoo willing to do to protect the first light he's let into his life in years? And how far is Lena willing to go into the darkness to stand beside him? If you need to know what happens next, if you believe in the power of a quiet love in a loud and dangerous world, then subscribe and join this community. Your support is what lets these stories unfold. Let me know in the comments what you think Jin Woo's next move should be, because his enemies are watching and they've already seen what he cares about most.